The Harrington Grand Hotel stood like a crown jewel in the heart of downtown Seattle, Washington, 42 floors of glass and steel that caught the morning light and threw it back at the city in ribbons of gold and silver. It was the kind of place that made ordinary people slow their steps on the sidewalk outside, tilt their heads back, and simply stare. Maya Calloway had never slowed her steps for anything in her life. She was 28 years old, with dark brown hair that she kept in a perpetual messy bun, a coffee cup permanently attached to her right hand, and a clipboard that she treated like a third arm. She was the assistant events coordinator for Harrington Grand, which meant she was, in practical terms, the person who made sure that everyone else's brilliance actually worked in the real world. She confirmed the florists. She triple-checked the catering. She memorized seating charts the way other people memorized song lyrics. And she never, not once in 3 years of working at the Harrington, made a mistake on a guest list. Until the night of the Whitmore Foundation Gala. It was a Thursday in late October, and Seattle had decided to remind everyone that it was, in fact, Seattle. The rain came down in silver sheets, the kind that blurred the city lights into watercolor smears, and the temperature had dropped just enough to make everyone walk a little faster and hug their coats a little tighter. Maya was already in the hotel at 6 in the morning, before the city had properly woken up, running through her checklist with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was not just any event, it was the event. Once a year, Elena Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Capital Management, hosted a fundraising gala for children's literacy programs across the Pacific Northwest. The guest list read like a who's who of Seattle's most powerful, most influential, and most generously wealthy individuals. Silicon Valley tech founders who had moved north, old money families who had been in Washington since before it was a state. Artists, politicians, philanthropists, and the occasional celebrity who had a vacation home in the San Juan Islands. It was the kind of event that, if you handled it perfectly, could make your career, and if you handled it imperfectly, could end it. Maya had handled it perfectly for 2 years in a row. She was fully prepared to make it 3. The gala itself went beautifully. The flowers were breathtaking white peonies and deep burgundy dahlias that made the ballroom look like something out of a painting. The string quartet played with delicate precision. The champagne flowed smoothly, the canapés were impeccable, and Elena Whitmore herself glided through the room in a midnight blue gown, accepting compliments with the practiced grace of someone who had been powerful long enough to wear it comfortably. Maya moved through the edges of the evening like a ghost, invisible and essential, adjusting and confirming and quietly solving the small crises that no guest ever noticed because she solved them before they became visible. At 9:47 in the evening, with the auction going smoothly and the band transitioning to a warmer, danceable set, Maya allowed herself exactly 1 moment of satisfaction. She leaned against the wall just outside the ballroom doors, closed her eyes and breathed. She did not see the mistake, not yet. The mistake was waiting for her upstairs. At 11:15, the guests began to drift toward the elevators in 1s and 2s. Several of the out-of-town attendees were staying at the Harrington itself, a perk that Elena Whitmore arranged every year, booking a block of rooms on the 38th floor for her most valued guests. Maya was standing at the front desk, doing a final handoff with the night manager, a steady and unflappable man named Gerald, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from the head of housekeeping. Room 3807 has been prepared for Ms. Elena Hartwell, but we also have a Ms. Elena Hargrove on the list. Did you mean to book them both in adjoining rooms? Maya stared at the text. Then she looked at her clipboard. Then she looked at the original guest list that she had submitted to the hotel booking system 3 weeks ago, which she had pulled up on her phone. And there it was. Elena Hartwell, billionaire entrepreneur, founder of Hartwell Technologies, one of the most prominent figures in the American tech industry, and a woman who was, by every reliable account, the most precisely particular person about her accommodations that the Harrington had ever hosted. Room 3807 had been reserved for her, presidential suite level, 38th floor, corner room with a view of both the Sound and the mountains on clear days. Elena Hargrove, a poet and literary advocate from Portland, Oregon, who had been invited to speak briefly at the gala about the Foundation's impact on rural libraries. A lovely woman, absolutely lovely, and absolutely not someone who had been intended to receive a room on the 38th floor. Maya had transposed 2 names. In 3 years of working at the Harrington, she had never made a mistake on a guest list. Her record was, as of 11:16 on a Thursday night in October, no longer perfect. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She called housekeeping back and asked them to check whether Ms. Elena Hargrove had already checked into room 3806, the room that had been erroneously assigned to her. The answer came back in under 2 minutes. Yes, Ms. Hargrove had checked in at 11:02. She was already in the room. She had already changed into her pajamas, which housekeeping knew because when they had knocked to deliver a complimentary turn-down amenity basket, she had answered the door in plaid flannel pants and a Portland Trail Blazers sweatshirt, looking extremely comfortable. Maya pinched the bridge of her nose and thought very, very carefully. She could not move Elena Hargrove. The woman was already settled in, already comfortable, and it was nearly midnight. Moving her now would be a nightmare, an embarrassment, and an insult to a guest who had done absolutely nothing wrong. She could attempt to explain the situation to Miss Hartwell upon her arrival, and offer the presidential suite on the 40th floor as a replacement. Or she could handle this quietly, arrange an alternative room for the situation, and make sure that both women were comfortable without anyone having to know about the error. She chose option 3. The problem was that the Harrington was almost fully booked that night. The gala had filled it substantially. The only available room on the 38th floor, the floor that Elena Whitmore had specifically requested for her guests, for security and consistency, was room 3809, which was directly adjacent to room 3807, which was Elena Hartwell's room. Maya took a long, slow breath. Then she made a decision that she would later describe to her closest friends as either the best mistake of her life or the moment everything changed. She wasn't sure which one was more accurate, maybe both. She assigned room 3809 to Elena Hargrove, sent a note to housekeeping to quietly move Miss Hargrove's things from 3806 to 3809 with the warmest possible apologies, and a complimentary bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir in acknowledgement of her Portland roots, and she went back to managing the end of the evening. She did not know then what that single-room assignment would set into motion. Elena Hartwell arrived at the Harrington Grand at 11:49 p.m. She arrived the way she did everything, with precision and without fanfare. No entourage, no publicist trailing behind her with a phone pressed to her ear. Just Elena, a single carry-on suitcase that she pulled herself despite the fact that 3 bellhops immediately materialized to offer assistance, and a quiet, watchful presence that made the lobby feel slightly more charged just by virtue of her being in it. She was 35 years old. She was, by several measures, one of the most powerful women in American business. Hartwell Technologies had built the software infrastructure that 3 of the country's largest hospital networks ran on, and her philanthropic work through the Hartwell Education Initiative had put computer science programs into over 400 underfunded schools across 14 states. She had been on the cover of Forbes twice and had declined to be on it a 3rd time because, as she had said in an interview, "I prefer to be known for what I build, not for how I photograph." She was, in every public sense, formidable. In private, she was something more complicated. Maya watched her cross the lobby from a respectful distance, already prepared with the room key and a quiet, professional smile. She intercepted Elena at exactly the right moment, not too eager, not delayed. "Miss Hartwell," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Welcome to the Harrington. I'm Maya Calloway, the events coordinator for this evening. Everything has been prepared for you on the 38th floor, room 3807. Elena Hartwell looked at her. She had grey eyes, not the pale, washed-out grey that sometimes photographed cold, but a deep, layered grey, like storm clouds with depth to them. Her dark hair was cut short on the sides and longer on top, swept back in a way that was simultaneously professional and effortlessly stylish. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, the top button undone, and she looked exactly like what she was, someone who had just spent 6 hours being impeccably composed in public and was now very ready to be alone. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was lower than Maya expected, measured, like someone who had learned at some point to choose her words carefully. "If you need anything at all tonight," Maya said, "please don't hesitate to reach the night concierge, and I want you to know that your stay is fully comp." "I'm sorry," Elena said, and her eyes sharpened slightly in the way that very perceptive people's eyes sharpen when something doesn't quite add up. "Is there anything I should know about the floor, any other guests?" Maya maintained her composure with the professionalism of someone who had been trained for exactly this kind of moment. A few other gala guests are on the same floor, she said, all of whom were specifically invited by Ms. Whitmore's team. You'll have complete privacy and quiet. I've personally ensured it. Elena studied her for a moment longer than was strictly comfortable. Then she gave a small nod, accepted the key card, and turned toward the elevators. Maya exhaled very quietly once Elena's back was turned. What Maya did not know, what she had no reason to know, was that Elena Hartwell had not wanted to come to Seattle at all this week. She had come because Elena Whitmore was one of the few people in the world for whom Elena would rearrange her schedule without resentment. Elena had known Elena's mother. She had, in the years after Elena's mother passed away, been something of a quiet, occasional presence, not a replacement, not even close, but a steady reminder that kindness from unexpected quarters was still kindness. Beyond that, Elena had been, for the past 14 months, in a state that she privately described as recalibrating, which was a very Elena Hartwell way of saying she was lonely. She would not have used that word out loud. She used words like transition and reassessment and focused clarity. She told her assistant, when asked about her personal life, that she was not prioritizing that area right now. She told her therapist in their bi-weekly sessions that she was making peace with a particular kind of solitude. Her therapist, a kind and deeply patient woman named Dr. Frances Okafor, had looked at her over the rim of her reading glasses and said, "Elena, do you think there's a difference between making peace with solitude and simply being afraid of trying again?" Elena had changed the subject. The truth was that she had been in love once. Genuinely, completely, recklessly in love, in the way that she had not expected, and had not therefore been prepared to lose. Her name had been Cassandra Cass, and she had been a marine biologist with laughing eyes, and a habit of falling asleep on Elena's shoulder during movies, and an absolute inability to keep a plant alive, despite her encyclopedic knowledge of aquatic ecosystems. They had been together for 4 years. Elena had believed with a certainty that she now recognized as the particular hubris of someone who has never lost the thing they love most, forever material. They had not been forever material. Cass had left not badly, not cruelly. She had sat across from Elena at their kitchen table on a Sunday morning in August with coffee that was going cold and sunlight coming through the windows, and she had said gently and with absolute clarity, "I love you. And I think you love me. But I don't think you're here, Elena. I don't think you've been here for a long time, and I can't keep waiting for a version of you that you might not even want to be." Elena had not known what to say to that. She still didn't. That had been 14 months ago. And Elena had thrown herself into work with a devotion that she recognized, intellectually, was compensatory, and continued doing it anyway, because work was something she was good at, and love was something she had apparently failed at in ways she was still trying to understand. She stepped off the elevator on the 38th floor, found room 3807, and let herself in. The room was beautiful. Of course it was the Harrington, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the rain-blurred lights of Seattle, a king bed dressed in white linen, a sitting area with deep armchairs and a coffee table that held a small arrangement of flowers and a handwritten welcome card. Elena set her suitcase down, shrugged off her blazer and stood at the window for a long moment, watching the rain streak down the glass. The city looked soft from up here, blurred at the edges, less demanding. She was thinking about calling her assistant to confirm tomorrow's morning schedule when she heard, very faintly, through the wall to her right, a sound. Someone was crying. It was not loud. It was, in fact, very deliberately not loud, the kind of crying that someone does when they are trying very hard not to be heard. Quiet and ragged and contained, the sound of someone who is sad about something specific and real, and is handling it with as much dignity as possible at midnight in a hotel room. Elena stood very still. She was not, by nature, a person who involved herself in other people's emotional situations. She had, over the years, developed a careful and respectful distance from the messiness of others' inner lives, not from coldness, but from a genuine belief that people deserved the privacy of their grief. She had had her own grief handled without interference, and she had been grateful for it. But there was something about the specific quality of this sound, the particular contained quality of someone crying alone, that reached through the wall and through her careful distance, and settled somewhere in her chest that she had been trying, for 14 months, to keep closed. She did not knock on the wall. She was not going to knock on the wall. She was a private person who respected privacy, and she was going to have a glass of water and read for an hour and go to sleep. She filled a glass of water from the bathroom tap. She sat in one of the armchairs. She opened her book, a biography of a pioneering computer scientist that she had been meaning to finish for 2 months. She read the same paragraph 4 times. The crying had stopped, which should have made it easier to concentrate. It did not, because now the quiet from the other side of the wall was the kind of quiet that is somehow louder than the quiet of someone who has stopped crying and is now just sitting with whatever made them cry in the first place. Elena put the book down. She told herself she was going to get another glass of water. She walked to the door of her room instead and opened it, and stood in the carpeted hallway of the 38th floor, which was empty and softly lit, and smelled faintly of the hotel's signature cedar and white tea fragrance. The door to room 3809 was right there, 3 feet away, closed obviously. Behind it, someone was sitting alone at almost midnight in a hotel room and had recently been crying. Elena stood in the hallway for approximately 45 seconds. Then she went back into her room, found the hotel notepad on the desk, and wrote in her neat, precise handwriting. "I'm in 3807. I'm sorry if this is intrusive. I just wanted to say that the walls here are apparently quite good but not perfect, and I heard enough to know you might be having a difficult night. You don't have to respond to this, you don't have to do anything. But if you wanted company or just someone to sit quietly with, I'm awake and I have no pressing obligations." She slid the note under the door of room 3809. Then she went back to her room and sat down and told herself she had absolutely no expectation of a response, and that was completely fine. 8 minutes later, there was a knock at her door. The woman in the doorway of room 3809, the woman who had been assigned there by Maya Calloway's corrected error, was, Elena thought, one of the most unexpectedly striking people she had seen in a long time. Not beautiful in the particular way that the word usually meant in public contexts, beautiful in a more specific and interesting way, the kind of face that had lived in it, lines around the eyes from laughing and from something sadder. Dark red hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders, slightly dishevelled in the way of someone who had taken it down at the end of an evening. She was wearing the plaid flannel pants and the Portland sweatshirt that housekeeping had reported, and she was holding Elena's note in one hand and looking at Elena with an expression that was simultaneously grateful and embarrassed, and something else that Elena could not quite name. "I'm so sorry," the woman said. Her voice had a warmth to it, a natural resonance that made Elena think involuntarily of fireplaces and autumn. "I didn't realize I was trying very hard to be quiet." "You were," Elena said. "I just happened to be a light sleeper, and I hadn't gone to sleep yet." The woman looked at her. "Your note said E," she said. "I'm Elena too, which feels strange to mention but seems relevant." Elena blinked. Then, despite everything, despite the careful distance and the 14 months of recalibration and the biography she hadn't finished, she felt something shift in her expression towards something very nearly like a smile. "That's an unusual coincidence." "I'm Elena Hargrove," the woman said. "I'm a poet from Portland. I spoke at the gala tonight about the Foundation's rural library work." She paused. "I'm also apparently very bad at not crying in hotel rooms." "Elena Hartwell," Elena said. "I build software. I wasn't at the speaking portion of the evening." Another pause. "I'm apparently very bad at minding my own business through walls." Elena Hargrove, the poet, the woman in the flannel pajamas, the woman who had been misassigned to room 3809 by a transposed name on a guest list, looked at her for a moment that stretched just slightly past comfortable. Then she said, "Your note said you had no pressing obligations." "I don't. Would you like to come sit with me for a while? I have wine that I haven't opened yet. The hotel left it. I don't actually know why." Elena Hartwell, who had not sat with anyone at midnight in a hotel room in 14 months, who had been recalibrating and reassessing and making peace with solitude, said, "Yes, I'd like that." The room was a mirror of Elena's own, same layout, same white linen, same windows showing the rain, but it already felt inhabited in the way that some people's spaces immediately do. A worn paperback was splayed open on the nightstand. A cardigan was draped over the chair. A pair of reading glasses sat on the coffee table beside a small notebook that was filled, Elena could see from across the room, with handwriting so dense it was almost its own landscape. Elena Hargrove opened the Pinot Noir with the efficient confidence of someone who had opened many bottles of wine at many different hours of the evening, poured 2 glasses, and handed one to Elena without ceremony. They sat Elena in one armchair, Elena Hargrove in the other, with the coffee table between them and Seattle running its quiet rain fingers down the windows, and they did not talk immediately. The silence was, Elena noticed, not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who are both tired and honest enough not to fill space with sound just because it's there. "You don't have to tell me what you were crying about," Elena said after a while. "I mean that. I didn't want you to be alone with it, whatever it was." Elena Hargrove looked at her over the rim of her wine glass. Her eyes were green, Elena noticed. Not a simple green but a layered one, hazel at the edges and deep at the center. That's a kind thing to say. Most people would lead with the question. "I'm not most people." "No," Hargrove said thoughtfully. "I can see that." She looked down at her wine for a moment. "It was my grandmother. She passed away last week. I came here straight from a week in rural Maine helping my family sort through her things. I'd been holding it together very well, I thought. And then I got to the room and there were flowers on the table and they were the exact kind she always grew in her garden and she trailed off. It's ridiculous, to be undone by flowers." "It's not ridiculous," Elena said quietly. "It's grief. Grief is always waiting for the specific thing that takes down your defenses. Sometimes it's flowers, sometimes it's the smell of coffee, sometimes it's a song you didn't even know you'd associated with someone." Elena Hargrove looked at her. "That sounds like experience." "My mother 7 years ago." Elena turned the wine glass in her hands. "I was in Tokyo for a business conference. I got the call at 3 in the morning local time. I spent the next week doing a very thorough impression of someone who was fine, and then one afternoon I was in a grocery store in San Francisco, and they were playing a song she used to hum while she cooked, and I stood in the cereal aisle and cried for about 15 minutes. She paused. "The stock boy was very kind about it." Elena Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "I'm sorry about your mother." "I'm sorry about your grandmother." A pause. The rain continued its patient work on the windows. "She taught me to write," Hargrove said after a while. "My grandmother, she was a schoolteacher in a small town in Vermont for 40 years. She had this absolute conviction that words were the most important thing, that being able to write what you feel and think was a form of freedom that no one could take from you." She smiled, and it was a smile with sorrow in it but also something warmer underneath. "She was the one who read my first poems. She said, 'Elena, you have a voice. Now learn to trust it.' I didn't for a long time, but I kept trying because she told me to." Elena found herself listening in a way she had not listened to someone in a long time. Not processing, not formulating responses, just actually listening. Letting the words arrive without immediately categorizing them. "What do you write about?" she asked. Hargrove considered the question seriously, which Elena appreciated. She had noticed that most people, when asked what they wrote about, defaulted immediately to genre or form: poems, fiction, essays. Hargrove seemed to actually think about the substance of the question. "Connection," she said finally, "and the failure of it and sometimes the recovery from it." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you build?" "Infrastructure," Elena said. "Systems that allow other systems to function. The things you don't see that make the visible things work." "That sounds," Hargrove said, with a careful thoughtfulness that suggested she was not being sycophantic, "like exactly the kind of thing that never gets the credit it deserves." "No," Elena agreed, "it doesn't." "Do you mind that?" Elena considered this. "I used to think I didn't. I used to think I genuinely preferred it, the invisibility of the work. But I think now that I confused preferring the invisibility of the work with being comfortable being invisible more generally." She paused, slightly surprised at herself for saying this. She did not typically say things like this to people she had known for 30 minutes. "That's more than I intended to say." Hargrove smiled, and this time the sorrow was less present and the warmth more so. "I'm told I have an extractive quality," she said. "People say things to me they didn't plan to say. My therapist says it's because I actually listen. I'm not sure if that's a gift or an imposition." "Tonight it's a gift," Elena said, and meant it. They talked until 2 in the morning. It was not the kind of conversation that Elena could have outlined afterward, point by point. It moved too naturally for that, from grief to childhood to work to the particular loneliness of being very good at something that isolates you, to books they had both loved, to places they had both wanted to go and hadn't, to the specific quality of Seattle rain versus Portland rain. They agreed that Seattle's was more theatrical, Portland's more habitual, to the way time moves differently after loss. To the question of what it means to be brave about ordinary things when you have already proven yourself in the extraordinary ones. At some point, Elena Hargrove curled her legs up under her in the armchair, a comfortable, unself-conscious gesture that made her look suddenly like someone very different from the composed woman who had opened the door in plaid pajamas, or perhaps, Elena thought, like exactly who she had always been, without the layer of public-facing composure. At some point, Elena Hartwell took off her shoes and set them neatly beside the chair, and accepted a second glass of wine, and stopped monitoring the conversation for the things she usually monitored it for. At 2 a.m, with the wine finished and the rain gentled to a quieter register outside, Elena Hargrove said, "Can I read you something?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitating. Hargrove reached for the notebook on the coffee table, the dense landscape text one, and flipped through it with the particular ease of someone who knows their own handwriting well. She found a page and held it in the lamplight and read. "What I know of bravery is this. It is not the absence of the wall, but the decision to speak through it anyway. Knowing the person on the other side may or may not be listening, may or may not be ready, may or may not be what you hoped. Bravery is the note slipped under the door. It is the knock that comes back. It is the wine opened at midnight, without occasion, except that you were lonely. And so was I." She lowered the notebook. The room was very quiet. "When did you write that?" Elena asked. "Just now," Hargrove said, "while you were looking at the window." Elena really looked at her and felt something she had not felt in 14 months, something she had been carefully, methodically, and apparently unsuccessfully walling off. It was not dramatic. It was not a thunderclap or a revelation. It was quieter and more persistent than that. It was recognition. "That's very beautiful," she said. "You inspired it," Hargrove said simply, without performance. A pause. "I should go back to my room," Elena said. "It's very late." "It is," Hargrove agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Elena stood and collected her shoes and crossed the room toward the door. At the door she turned. "Would you like to have breakfast?" she said. "Tomorrow, with me. There's a place called Elm and Ivory on Pike Street that I've been meaning to try. I've been to Seattle 3 times this year and somehow never made it." Elena Hargrove looked at her from the armchair with those layered green eyes and said, "Yes, I would like that very much." Maya Calloway arrived at the Harrington at 7:15 the next morning. She was, as always, carrying a coffee and a clipboard, and she was, as always, already running through her mental checklist before she reached the front door. She was also preparing herself, in the private portion of her mind that she did not reveal to colleagues, for the possibility that Elena Hartwell had discovered the room mix-up, and was, perhaps, going to be displeased about it. Maya had a whole graceful, apologetic speech prepared. She had personally arranged for a complimentary full spa day, a bottle of vintage champagne, and a handwritten note of apology. She was ready. What she was not ready for was Gerald at the front desk, who greeted her with a slightly bewildered expression and said, "The strangest thing happened last night." Maya set down her coffee. "Tell me." "Miss Hartwell, 3807, she came down about 20 minutes ago with a woman I didn't immediately recognize, and they went out together. They were laughing." He paused, as if this detail was the most confusing part. "Miss Hartwell doesn't usually laugh." Maya stared at him. "Laughing." "Laughing," Gerald confirmed. "And the other woman, I checked the registry, she's Elena Hargrove, the poet from the gala." He looked at Maya. "Is that normal?" "No," Maya said, "that's not normal." She picked up her coffee again. "That's something else entirely." She would not know for several more weeks exactly how right she was. Elm and Ivory on Pike Street was the kind of place that Seattle did better than almost anywhere. Unpretentious but excellent. The coffee was serious without being precious about it. The food was Pacific Northwest in the best sense, eggs from a local farm, smoked salmon that had been treated with actual respect, sourdough that had clearly been given the time it needed. The windows were large, and the morning light came in pale and washed clean by the previous night's rain. Elena Hartwell arrived first, which was consistent with her general approach to everything. She chose a table near the window, ordered a black coffee and a glass of water, and sat with her phone face down on the table, which was something she did very rarely. Elena Hargrove arrived 3 minutes later, still in her gala-adjacent clothes from last night since she hadn't had time to change she'd been. She explained, finishing writing something with her red hair down and slightly damp from a quick shower and a light jacket that had a small pin on the lapel in the shape of an open book. She sat down across from Elena and looked at her in the morning light and said, "You actually came." "I said I would. People say things at midnight that they don't always mean in the morning." "I'm not most people," Elena said. The callback to the previous night was gentle, deliberate, and Hargrove caught it immediately. Her expression shifted into something warmer. "No," she said, "you're not." They ordered breakfast and talked for 2 hours. It was different from the midnight conversation, lighter in register, more logistical, more present tense. They discovered practical things about each other. Hargrove took her coffee with oat milk and too much sugar, which Elena found quietly endearing. Elena ate methodically, which Hargrove found fascinating in a way she didn't quite articulate. They had both spent formative portions of their childhoods in New England, Elena in Massachusetts, Hargrove in Vermont, near where her grandmother had lived. They had both, independently, had a period in their mid-20s of reading everything they could find about systems. For Elena, technological; for Hargrove, ecological and social. "What do you do after this?" Hargrove asked over the second coffees. "I fly back to San Francisco tonight. I have a board meeting Monday." Elena paused. "You?" "I drive back to Portland tomorrow morning. I'm reading at a bookstore on Saturday afternoon." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "It's a small reading, maybe 30 people, that's usually how it is." "I'd like to come," Elena said. Hargrove looked up. "To Portland?" "To the reading. A beat." "You're saying you drive to Portland for a poetry reading," Hargrove said carefully. "Fly to Portland," Elena corrected. "It's a short flight, and then drive to the bookstore, and then, if you were amenable, dinner afterward." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. There was something in her expression that Elena was learning to read, a particular quality of stillness that happened when she was processing something that mattered. "Elena," she said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like you to answer directly, because I think we're both people who can do that." "Yes," Elena said. "Is this what you're proposing? Is this friendship? Or is it something you're hoping might be something else?" Elena looked at her across the table in the morning light, with the remains of breakfast between them and the Seattle street, going about its Friday morning business outside the windows, and she said without hesitation, "It's something I'm hoping might be something else." Hargrove held her gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the sad warm smile from the night before, not the gentle recognition smile from the poem, but something newer and brighter and slightly nerve-wracked around the edges, the smile of someone who is both pleased and slightly terrified. "Okay," she said, "then I'll send you the bookstore address." The bookstore was called Between the Lines, and it was on a quiet street in Portland's inner southeast, sandwiched between a coffee roaster and a bicycle repair shop, the way the best Portland bookstores always seemed to be. Its windows were filled with a carefully curated arrangement of books and plants and a small hand-lettered sign that read, "Poetry Reading Tonight, ELENA HARGROVE, 7 p.m, SEATS Limited, Wine SERVD." Elena Hartwell landed at PDX at 4:47 p.m. She had brought her carry-on again, and she had a hotel room booked, a different hotel this time, one she had chosen herself on her own, without any input from event coordinators or guest lists, and she had given her assistant the evening off. She found the bookstore at 6:52. She was characteristically early. The space was smaller than she had expected and warmer, wooden shelves packed with books that had been arranged with obvious love, mismatched chairs and small tables, a low stage at one end with a single microphone and a reading lamp. The promised wine was being poured by a young man with an impressive beard at a table near the door. Approximately 40 people were settling into seats or talking in small groups, not the 30 Hargrove had predicted. Maury. Elena took a glass of wine and found a seat in the third row. She was not recognizable to most people in this room, which was unusual for her and surprisingly comfortable. She was just a woman in a blazer at a poetry reading. She was nervous. She had not been nervous about anything personal in a very long time. Then Elena Hargrove came out from a back room, and any remaining composure Elena had carefully maintained for the past 2 days did something that composure very rarely did with her. It simply let go. Hargrove was wearing a dark green dress that was exactly right for her colouring, and for the November evening, and for the warm lamplight of the bookstore. Her red hair was down. She had the notebook under her arm, the same dense text notebook from the hotel room. She stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the room with an expression that was nervous and alive and absolutely present, and when she said, "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here on such a rainy night. I promised to make it worth the wet shoes," and the room laughed. Elena understood something about her that she hadn't fully understood before. She was fearless when she had words. She read for 45 minutes. She read older poems and new ones, moving between them with a natural ease that suggested she thought of her work as one continuous conversation rather than a series of discrete pieces. She read a poem about her grandmother that made several people in the room cry, including Elena, quietly in the third row, in a way she hoped no one noticed. And then, near the end, she said, "This last one I wrote very recently. It's still a little rough. I'm reading it tonight because I think it needs to be heard, and also because the person who inspired it is here, and I think she'll forgive me." There was a general, gentle murmur in the room, the warm curiosity of people who enjoy a small revelation. Hargrove read the poem from the midnight hotel room, the one about bravery and walls and notes, slipped under doors and wine opened without occasion. When she finished, she looked up and found Elena in the third row with a directness and simplicity that made Elena's chest feel like it was doing something structurally unprecedented. The room applauded. Elena did too. Afterward, in the small gathering and book-signing portion of the evening, people clustered around Hargrove, and Elena stayed near the bookshelves and let them, because she was patient, and because she liked watching Hargrove interact with readers, the specific quality of attention she gave each person, the way she made each conversation feel like the only conversation. When the last reader had drifted away, and the bookstore owner was beginning the gentle closing time shuffle, Hargrove crossed the room to where Elena was standing with a half-finished glass of wine, and an expression she was no longer trying to keep entirely neutral. "You cried," Hargrove said softly. "The grandmother poem," Elena said. "It was very good." "It's the truest thing I've written in years." A pause. "Thank you for being here." "Thank you for the poem," Elena said. "The midnight one." Hargrove was standing close, bookstore close, the kind of close that a crowded space justifies, but that had not been required by crowding for the last 10 minutes. "Are you still amenable to dinner?" she asked. "I flew from San Francisco," Elena said. "For the reading, I am extremely amenable to dinner." Hargrove's smile was wide and warm and slightly unguarded in a way that Elena was beginning to understand was rare and was therefore precious. "Good," she said. "I know a place." The place was a small Italian restaurant 6 blocks from the bookstore, the kind that has been in the same family for 2 generations and does not have a website and is not on any best-of lists because the regulars have collectively decided, without discussion, to keep it to themselves. The owner greeted Hargrove by name and led them to a corner table in the back, away from the window, where a candle was already lit, and the tablecloth was slightly uneven, and the bread came without being asked. They ordered wine and pasta, and talked without the slight formality of the previous 2 days without, Elena noticed, the particular self-consciousness that comes from 2 people who are discovering each other, and are therefore monitoring themselves for the impression they're making. That layer had somehow dissolved between the reading and the 6-block walk in the November Portland rain, and what remained was just the 2 of them. "How long have you been in Portland?" Elena asked. 8 years. I came for a fellowship at the Literary Center and never left." Hargrove tore a piece of bread. "That's the classic Portland story. You come for a thing and the city gets into you somehow." "Do you like it?" "I love it. It's the right size for the life I want to live. San Francisco must be interesting." "It's enormous and relentless," Elena said, "which suits the work but is less compatible with." She paused, searching for the word. "Stillness," Hargrove offered. "Yes, that exactly. Do you have much stillness in your life?" Elena considered the question with the same honesty she had been bringing to this whole endeavor. "Not enough," she said. "I've spent the past year convincing myself that I preferred it that way, that stillness was a luxury I didn't need. I'm beginning to think that might have been." She paused. "A coping mechanism." "What were you coping with?" The candle between them made everything the color of warmth. Elena said, "A relationship that ended, 14 months ago. Someone who told me that I wasn't fully present and that she couldn't wait any longer for me to be. Hargrove listened. She did not rush to fill the space. The difficult thing, Elena said, was that she was right. I wasn't fully present. I didn't know how to be. I thought being present meant being physically available, being attentive in the ways that were visible. It didn't occur to me that presence was something internal, something you had to choose. She looked at the candle. I've been thinking about that a lot this year. And are you choosing it now? Hargrove asked, quietly, without pressure. I'm trying to, Elena said. I think I'm better at it when I'm with you than I have been at it in a long time. A pause. That might sound like too much. I'm aware we met 2 days ago. It doesn't sound like too much, Hargrove said. It sounds honest, and I think I've been writing around the same thing for years without being brave enough to live it. Elena looked at her. What do you mean? Hargrove was quiet for a moment, turning her wine glass. I write about connection constantly. I've written poems about love and loss and the bravery of opening yourself to another person, and I've given readings and people have come up to me crying and said, "This is exactly what I feel," and I've thought, yes, that's why I write it. And meanwhile, in my actual life, she let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I've been very careful, very protected. I've been choosing people who are safe because they're not quite right, which is a terrible thing to say and also completely true. Why? Because the last time I wasn't careful, she said simply. I fell in love with someone who left, and I wrote 12 poems about it, and then spent 3 years not letting anyone close enough to require an honest poem. Elena said, I've been running a different version of the same algorithm. Hargrove looked at her. I know, she said. I could tell through the wall before we'd even spoken. You could tell I was running an avoidance algorithm, from the sound of my footsteps. From the quality of your silence, Hargrove said. When someone is lonely and trying very hard not to show it, there's a particular quality to the silence they keep. It's too careful, it's silence that's working. She paused. Yours was working very hard. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's either the most perceptive thing anyone has ever said to me or the most terrifying. In my experience, those are often the same thing. The pastor arrived. They ate and talked, and the restaurant got quieter as the evening progressed, and the rain outside continued its steady Portland habitualism. And at some point, Elena looked up from her plate and found Hargrove already looking at her, and the expression on Hargrove's face was open and present and completely unguarded, and Elena felt, for the first time in 14 months, like she was actually in the room she was in. Not planning ahead, not processing, not monitoring, just here with this woman, in this candlelit corner in Portland, Oregon, actually here. I want to tell you something, Elena said. Tell me. I came to that reading because I wanted to see you, not as a friendly gesture or a professional courtesy. I came because I have thought about you constantly since Thursday night, and I have been very deliberately pretending to myself that it was just interesting conversation with an interesting person, and I think I owe you the honesty of admitting that it was more than that. Hargrove held her gaze for a long, clear moment. It was more than that for me too, she said. It's been a long time since I wrote a poem for someone. I've been telling myself all week it was just the moment, the wine, the late hour, but I was lying to myself. Would you like to not lie to ourselves? Elena said. Hargrove's smile was slow and warm, and the most fully present thing Elena had seen in a very long time. Yes, she said. I think I would like that very much. Love, when it comes to two people who are both well practiced in independence and cautious about vulnerability, does not arrive like a flood. It arrives more like weather, gradually, then consistently, then so integrated into the landscape that it becomes difficult to remember what the landscape looked like before it. For Elena, which was what their friends would eventually call them, with varying degrees of amusement, it arrived in pieces over the following months. It arrived in phone calls that started as 30-minute check-ins and became 2-hour conversations that ended with one of them realizing it was 1 a.m, and she had an early meeting and she hadn't wanted to stop talking. It arrived in texts at random hours, Hargrove sending photographs of poems she'd seen on public art installations in Portland, Elena sending dry one-line observations about the tech world that made Hargrove laugh in the specific loud way that she tried to suppress in public spaces and failed at entirely. It arrived in the practical geography of two women who lived 450 miles apart and were, despite this, unwilling to let that be the governing fact. Elena flew to Portland in December for a weekend. They went to the Saturday market in the cold and ate ridiculous amounts of food from vendors who all seemed to know Hargrove personally. They walked along the river with the mountains on the horizon and talked about everything and nothing, and stopped at a bookshop where Hargrove bought Elena a collection of poems by a writer Elena hadn't read, and Elena bought Hargrove a book about network theory that Hargrove said she would absolutely read, and that Elena was 90% sure she wouldn't, but who would turn out to be wrong about that. Hargrove flew to San Francisco in January for 4 days. Elena took actual days off, real ones, not working from a different location, and showed her the parts of the city that she loved and had never had occasion to show anyone. A tiny gallery in the Mission that showed work by emerging artists, the particular quality of the light over the bay on a clear January morning, a tar career in the outer sunset that required a 40-minute bus ride and was completely worth it. "You're different here," Hargrove said on the second evening, sitting on Elena's balcony with the city laid out below them and wine in their hands. "How?" "Less armored," she said. "When you're working there's a quality to you that's not cold but contained, deliberate. Here you're more," she searched, "Maury yours." "I'm trying to be," Elena said. On the third night in San Francisco, they stood on the balcony after dinner and the city glittered below them, and Hargrove said quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "You can always ask me anything," Elena said. "Are you happy?" Elena looked at the question, really looked at it. She had been asked variations of this question many times over the years, by therapists and friends and interviewers who meant it rhetorically. She had answered it with the various calibrated responses that people use when they don't want to give the real answer. She didn't do that now. "I'm happier than I was," she said, "more than I expected to be this quickly. And I think," she paused, choosing the words carefully, "I think I'm becoming the kind of person who can be happier still. I wasn't sure I believed that was possible 4 months ago." "What changed?" Hargrove asked, though her eyes said she already knew. "Someone slipped a note under my door," Elena said. Hargrove laughed that uncontainable laugh, and the city lights reflected in her eyes, and Elena reached out and took her hand. And it was the first time she had taken her hand in this simple, claiming, uncomplicated way, and Hargrove looked down at their joined hands, and then up at Elena with an expression that was the most open thing Elena had ever seen on a human face. "I'm very glad you're a light sleeper," Hargrove said. "I'm very glad Maya made a mistake on the guest list," Elena said. February brought rain to both cities, Portland's steady and familiar, San Francisco's more dramatic and apologetic, and with it a deepening. The kind that happens when the initial excitement of new love makes room for something more complicated, and therefore more real. The person underneath the person you fell for. Elena drove to Portland for Valentine's Day weekend, and brought absolutely nothing romantic in any conventional sense, no flowers, no chocolates, but had, with considerable effort and the assistance of Hargrove's best friend, a ceramicist named Josephine, who had been extremely helpful and only slightly smug about the whole situation, arranged for a rare first edition of a poet that Hargrove had written her dissertation about to be waiting on her coffee table when they got home from dinner. Hargrove had stood very still in the doorway of her living room looking at the book for a long moment. Then she turned to Elena and said, "How did you know?" "I pay attention," Elena said, simply, and it was true. She had been paying attention with a quality of focus that she had previously reserved exclusively for problems she was trying to solve, and she was slowly learning that paying this kind of attention to a person was both different from and connected to that, and that it was, possibly, the most important thing she had learned to do. Hargrove crossed the room and cupped Elena's face in her hands and kissed her, and it was not their first kiss, but it felt like a deeper iteration of all the previous ones, more settled, more certain, less laced with the particular nervousness of new love and more anchored in something that was becoming, firmly and undeniably, love. But love, the real kind, the kind that matters, is not all grand gestures and aligned values and poetic symmetry. It is also the other things, the complicated things, the parts of yourself that you have been carrying quietly and alone, and that the person you love will eventually, inevitably, encounter. Elena's complicated thing was what Cass had named the presence problem, the tendency under stress and pressure and the weight of work to be physically in a room and psychologically somewhere else. She had been working on it. She was still working on it. And in March, when the biggest product launch in Hartwell Technologies' history created a pressure that eclipsed everything else in her personal landscape for 3 weeks, she felt it happen again. She felt herself recede. Not dramatically, not consciously, but in the small, daily ways. Shorter calls that ended too quickly, a cancelled Portland visit with inadequate advance notice, a weekend where she answered Hargrove's texts 2 to 4 hours late, and was not fully present even in the responses. Hargrove said nothing for 2 weeks. She was not a person who avoided difficult conversations, but she was a person who chose the timing of them carefully. Then she called on a Sunday evening and said, "I need to talk to you about something." Elena heard it in her voice, that particular, steady directness, and felt her stomach drop. "I've noticed," Hargrove said, calmly and without accusation, "that you've been less present this month, and I understand that you're in the middle of something enormous at work. I'm not asking you to not be. I'm asking you to tell me when it's happening, instead of letting me feel the distance and not know whether it's the launch or whether it's me." A pause. "That's fair," Elena said. "You're completely right, I'm sorry." "I don't need an apology," Hargrove said. "I need you to trust me enough to say, I'm underwater right now, give me 2 weeks, I'll surface. I can handle 2 weeks. What I can't handle is the silence that doesn't explain itself." Elena was quiet for a moment. "I'm underwater right now," she said. "The launch is in 8 days. I'm not sleeping enough and I'm thinking about it all the time, including when I'm supposedly talking to you, which is not fair to you and is also something I'm actively trying to fix." "Thank you," Hargrove said. "That's all I needed." "I learned to do the silent receding thing from years of believing that needing help or presence from someone was imposing," Elena said. "It's a habit I'm working to unlearn." "I know," Hargrove said gently. "I can see you working on it. I just need you to know that you can be imperfect here. You can be underwater and tell me so and I won't leave." Her voice softened. "That's not what I do." Elena felt something unlock in her chest at that. Something that Cass's leaving, the leaving that had made sense, the leaving that had been her own fault in ways she had finally accepted, had locked, and that she had been carrying locked ever since. "Thank you," she said, "for saying that directly." "We are both people who do better with directness," Hargrove said. "It's one of my favorite things about us." The launch happened. It went well. And 8 days later, Elena flew to Portland with a bottle of champagne and 12 hours of unscheduled time, and the particular quality of presence that comes from someone who has, with great effort, cleared the decks completely. Hargrove opened the door in paint-stained jeans and a flannel shirt. She had been working in her study and looked at her and said, "You're back." "I'm here," Elena said, "actually here." Hargrove pulled her inside and held on with the straightforward, unambiguous warmth of someone who does not perform affection, but means it entirely, and Elena held back with equal conviction, and felt the difference, again, between being present and merely being there. Spring came to Portland in the insistent, enthusiastic way that Portland spring always does, suddenly, extravagantly, as if the city has been storing up color all winter and is now releasing it all at once. Cherry blossoms on Division Street, tulips in Ladd's Addition, the kind of green that makes people from other places who visit in April genuinely reconsider their life choices. Elena was in Portland for 10 days in April. This was the longest she had been anywhere that was not San Francisco or a business trip since she was 22, and it was also the most consistently, quietly happy she had been in memory. They had, by this point, developed the rhythms of a shared life, without yet having made the formal decisions that would constitute one. Elena had a drawer at Hargrove's apartment. Hargrove had a shelf at Elena's San Francisco condo, a shelf that had, with characteristic thoroughness, been populated with approximately twice as many books as Elena had planned for when she offered the shelf. They cooked dinner together with the specific, comfortable competence of 2 people who have figured out how to navigate each other in a kitchen, Hargrove doing the creative portions with great enthusiasm and occasional disasters, Elena doing the structural portions with precision and a very well-calibrated sense of when to step in and when to let the enthusiasm run its course. They argued productively about things, the ethics of certain tech investments, the purpose of accessibility in art, whether the bookstore cat, a large orange animal named Fitzgerald who had adopted Hargrove years ago and regarded Elena with a professional suspicion that was slowly, incrementally warming, should be allowed on the kitchen counter. The answer to that last one was determined by Fitzgerald unilaterally, without consulting anyone. They read together in the evenings, with comfortable silence between them and occasional readings aloud of particularly interesting passages, Elena's, tending toward systems and structure, Hargrove's toward language and image, and it was these evenings, specifically, that Elena identified when trying to describe to her therapist what love felt like when it was functioning correctly. "What do you mean specifically?" Dr. Okafor asked. "I mean the absence of monitoring," Elena said. "I spend so much of my professional life monitoring the project, the team, the outcomes, the risk factors, and I spent a lot of my personal life doing the same thing in relationships without realizing it was happening, monitoring whether I was present enough, responsive enough, whether the other person was getting what they needed, whether I was calibrating correctly." She paused. "With Elena, I just sit there, reading, and I'm not monitoring anything. I'm just there." Dr. Okafor made a note. "That sounds like trust," she said. "I think it is," Elena said. "I think I haven't trusted anyone enough to stop monitoring since she thought about it. Maybe since I was a child, before I learned that I had to be careful." "What happened that taught you to be careful?" Elena considered this for a long time. "My father left when I was 9, she said finally. "Not dramatically, he just gradually disappeared. Moved to Phoenix for a job and then got a new family there and visited less and less until the visits stopped." She had said this before in earlier sessions, in different framings, but something about saying it now, in the context of what she was describing, made it feel different. "I think I learned then that if you needed someone to stay, you couldn't show them how much you needed it. You had to be sufficient, self-contained, not require too much." "And Elena Hargrove doesn't make you feel like you require too much." "She makes me feel like requiring things is acceptable," Elena said. "Like wanting presence and honesty and continuity is not an imposition, but just," she stopped, "just what people who love each other do." Dr. Okafor looked at her over the reading glasses. "You said love," she said. "That's the first time you've used that word in this context." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I did." She had not yet said it to Hargrove. Not because she didn't mean it. She did. She was increasingly certain that she did, in the way that certainty feels when it's been tested enough to be reliable, not the initial intoxicating certainty of early love, but the quieter, sturdier kind that comes from watching someone be themselves for months, in the good moments and the harder ones, and finding that your feeling for them survives both. She hadn't said it because she was waiting for the right moment, and she was aware that waiting for the right moment was, for her specifically, a category that could theoretically expand to accommodate indefinite delay if she let it. She was not going to let it. She said it on a Wednesday evening in April, in Portland, in Hargrove's kitchen. It was not a particularly dramatic or romantic setting. They were making dinner, a somewhat chaotic pasta situation that had started simple and developed ambitions, and Hargrove was telling a story about a student in the community writing workshop she ran on Tuesday evenings, a story that was funny and also quietly moving, about a retired fisherman from Astoria who had been writing poems about the ocean for 40 years and never shown them to anyone, and had finally brought them in and read them aloud and cried and hadn't known, until that moment, that what he had been writing was grief. "He said," Hargrove said, gesturing with a wooden spoon, "I didn't know poems were supposed to do that. I thought they were just the way I talked to myself when I couldn't say things out loud. And I thought," she stopped, because she had turned to look at Elena, and Elena's expression was doing something that Hargrove clearly recognized as significant. "What?" "I love you," Elena said. Hargrove went very still. "I've been certain of it for a while," Elena said. "I was waiting for a significant moment, and then I realized that I was going to be waiting forever if I applied my standards for significant to this, because I keep thinking that significant means dramatic, but I think actually," she gestured slightly at the kitchen, at the pasta, at the two of them, "this is significant, this exact thing. You telling me about the fisherman and his ocean poems. This is the kind of moment I want more of for the rest of my life." Hargrove set down the wooden spoon. She crossed the kitchen, which was not large, in 3 steps. She took Elena's face in her hands in the way she sometimes did, deliberate, unhurried, like she was making sure she had Elena's full attention, which she did entirely, and she said, "I love you too. I think I have since you slipped that note under my door. I've been trying to find the right poems for it for months." "Did you find them?" "No," Hargrove said. "I think I'm going to be writing them for a while." Elena kissed her, and the pasta boiled over, which they didn't notice for several minutes, and Fitzgerald knocked a dish towel off the counter, and outside the window Portland was doing its extravagant spring thing, And Elena Hartwell, who had spent 14 months recalibrating and reassessing and making peace with solitude, was completely, unreservedly, magnificently present. Summer in the Pacific Northwest is, when it comes, something luminous. The light lasts until 9 in the evening and comes back before 5 in the morning, and the sky turns the kind of blue that makes you understand why painters keep trying to capture it and never quite do. By June, Elena and Hargrove had been together for 8 months. They had seen each other in every weather and every mood. They had had 3 real arguments that required actual navigation and honest accounting, not the easy kind, and had resolved all 3 of them with a directness and care that made both of them afterward more secure rather than less. The arguments were about real things: the way Elena's work-receding habit could reactivate under stress, the way Hargrove, when feeling insecure, could sometimes choose oblique communication over direct, which drove Elena professionally and personally crazy, the question of the distance, which was a thing they had been careful not to directly address for several months, because addressing it directly would require making decisions. They addressed it directly in June. Elena drove up to Portland on a Friday evening, and on Saturday morning, with coffee and the windows open to the particular warm cool of a Pacific Northwest June morning, Hargrove said, "I think we should talk about what we are doing." "Yes," Elena said, "I think so too." They talked about the distance first, the practical geography of 450 miles that they had been managing with impressive dedication, and that was also, undeniably, a structural constraint on the thing they were building. Elena's company was headquartered in San Francisco. Hargrove's life was in Portland: her apartment, her workshop students, her bookstore community, the roots she had put down over 8 years. "I'm not asking you to move," Hargrove said carefully. "I want to be very clear about that." "I know," Elena said, "and I'm not asking you to move either." A pause. "But I want to talk about what the future looks like, concretely, because I have been very deliberately not thinking about it too hard, and I'm aware that's me being avoidant about something that matters." Hargrove looked at her with the direct, undefended attention that Elena had come to understand was her way of saying, "I'm here, go ahead. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Elena said slowly, "that I have run my company remotely from several different cities over the past decade, and that San Francisco is its headquarters, but is not the only place I can actually be. I'm thinking that I have been treating, my company is in San Francisco, as a fixed constraint when it may in fact be a flexible one." She paused. "I'm also thinking that Hargrove Technologies has a Portland office that is extremely underutilized, and that I own a building there that I have been leasing out for 3 years. She looked at Hargrove. "I'm not suggesting I would move immediately. I'm suggesting that the idea of moving eventually, deliberately, as a choice rather than as a sacrifice, is one I find increasingly appealing." Hargrove was very quiet. "You don't have to respond to that with," Elena started. "I'm not responding," Hargrove said. "I'm trying to be very honest about what I feel right now, which is," she stopped, took a breath. "Elena, I've been very careful in this whole relationship not to need too much, not to want too much, because I've had the experience before of wanting something enormous from someone and having the wanting be the thing that scared them away." "I know," Elena said quietly. "And what you're describing is so much more than I was allowing myself to want." Her voice was steady, but something in it was working to keep it that way. "So I need to ask you directly, are you saying this because you mean it, because you have calculated it and decided it's right, or are you saying it because you can see how much it would mean to me and you want to make me happy?" "Because I mean it," Elena said without hesitation. "Because I've been calculating it. Yes, you know I calculate things, but the calculation has consistently returned the same answer, which is that the life I want to be living is a life with more of you in it and fewer miles between us. That's not about making you happy. It's about being honest about what I want." Hargrove held her gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." "Okays." "Okay, I believe you. Okay, I want that too." Her eyes were bright. "Okay, we're doing this." Elena Hartwell did not move to Portland overnight. She was not fundamentally someone who made enormous changes in one dramatic gesture. She made them the way she built things, systematically, with planning and attention to detail, and with a patience that was, she was beginning to understand, one of her actual strengths rather than the avoidance mechanism she had occasionally mistaken it for. She began spending 3 weeks of every month in Portland in September, running the Portland office with the focused efficiency that was her professional signature, and that, her Portland team quickly discovered, was significantly less intimidating in person than it had seemed at a distance. She kept her San Francisco apartment. She began, quietly and without announcement, looking at properties in Portland's Inner East Side that had the specific combination of space and light and structural quality that she needed in a home. Hargrove continued her workshop. She finished the manuscript she had been working on for 2 years, a collection that her editor described as the most emotionally precise and structurally ambitious thing you've ever done, and dedicated it in a dedication that was a single sentence to E.H., who slipped a note under my door and changed the landscape. She was working on a new collection now, one that was, she told Elena, about presence, about learning to be in the place you are. Maya Calloway received in October a handwritten note on excellent stationery from an address in San Francisco. The note read, "Dear Maya, you made a mistake on a guest list last October, and I ended up in room 3809 instead of room 3806. I want you to know that this was the best mistake anyone has ever made on my behalf. The woman in room 3807 slipped a note under my door, and she has been the most consequential presence in my life since. Please don't feel bad about the error. Feel proud of it if anything. Some mistakes are just a different kind of rightness. With gratitude, Elena Hargrove. P.S. She says to tell you that the Whitmore Gala event management was flawless in every other respect, and she has already recommended the Harrington to several of her board members." Maya read the note twice at her desk. Then she set it down and stared at the middle distance for a long moment, thinking about guest lists and transposed names, and the way that the thing you least expect to matter turns out to be the thing that changes everything. Then she picked up her clipboard, because there was another event to coordinate and nothing would be miscalibrated, and yet, she thought, some small benevolent carelessness in the universe was always doing something she couldn't see. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was again held at the Harrington Grand on a Thursday in late October. Maya was coordinating it, as she had every year, and she was, as she had been every year, meticulous about every detail, including the guest list. This year there were 2 names near each other on the list that she checked 3 times, with extra care and slightly different feelings than she checked everything else. Elena Hartwell, room 3807, again as always. Elena Hargrove, listed as Ms. Hartwell's guest, same room. Maya smiled at the clipboard. She did not transpose any names. She did make a note to ensure that the flower arrangement in 3807 was changed from the standard white peonies to something new, white peonies and red tulips, which she had learned from a handwritten note on excellent stationery were Hargrove's grandmother's favourites. Some details matter. Some details are everything. The ballroom was full and the string quartet was playing, and Elena Whitmore was moving through the room in a different gown, this year deep red instead of midnight blue, and Maya was at the edges of the evening, invisible and essential, managing the small crises that no one would ever know she'd solved. At 9:15, she glimpsed them across the room. Elena Hartwell, in a charcoal blazer she had not changed from in terms of style, but that was somehow more relaxed in every way that mattered: the jacket slightly less buttoned up, the posture less armoured, the expression less monitored. Elena Hargrove, in a dark green dress that matched her eyes, talking to Elena Whitmore with the specific quality of animated warmth she brought to every conversation, but especially to conversations about books, and the people who write them and the children who are changed by them. At some point, Hargrove said something that made Elena Hartwell laugh, actually laugh, not the polite social approximation of it but the real thing, surprised and full-bodied and briefly unguarded, and Hartwell reached out and took Hargrove's hand in the simple, claiming, uncomplicated way that Maya had once been told about, but was seeing for the first time. And Hargrove looked at her, and the look was the kind that poets write about, not because it was dramatic, but because it was completely and unmistakably real. The look of someone who is exactly where she wants to be, with exactly the person she wants to be with, knowing exactly how she got here. Gerald, the night manager, appeared at Maya's elbow. "The 2 Elenas look happy tonight," he observed. "They do," Maya agreed. "I still think about that night, the mix-up." "Me too," Maya said. She looked at them across the ballroom, the woman who built invisible systems that made visible things work, and the woman who found words for the things that resisted them, and she thought about how sometimes the most important things in the world are the ones that happen because of a small, ordinary human mistake. A transposed name. A note slipped under a door, a knock that came back. And she thought about how she would never, not for anything, have changed it,